me great pleasure. It gives me a great pleasure in handing over to the night speakers, Matthew and Johnny. Over to you.
Thank you, Tim. Let's get the presentation going first of all.
Yeah, we can see that.
Good. There we are. Hopefully that's full screen for everyone. So good evening, everyone, and thank you very much indeed for the invitation to speak. Johnny and I are very sorry not to join you in person, but we're delighted to be able to offer you a talk, and we guarantee that it'll beat the entertainment at Wimbledon. So you've made the right choice this evening. I think I probably last gave a talk to the Reigate Society about 4 years ago, maybe longer. The memory can play tricks on you, but it was great at that time to be able to explore the SPAB's archive and just to see how many cases from Reigate we dealt with going back into the distant past. But tonight we want to do something a little bit different for you. What we're aiming principally to talk about is something called our Old House Project. You can see it here in this image, but we'll tell you a lot more about it as the evening goes on. Johnny and I have both spent a considerable amount of our working time and our private time, in fact, on this project since it began approaching 3 years ago now. But before we get into all of that, I'd just like to tell you a bit, or perhaps recap for those of you who've come across our organisation before, about who we are, where we come from, and the way we approach the world. So then, well, some of you may well know about us already, and forgive me if I'm telling you things you already know, but let's just have a brief outline. We lay claim to being the country's oldest building conservation organisation, certainly for the UK. There is one in Norway a little bit older, but for the UK at least, we can, I think, legitimately say we are the oldest now. Kevin MacLeod here is a long-standing member of the SPAB, a supporter, and now our formal ambassador. So he has been great for explaining what we're about to people who are interested. Let's go right back though. So the SPAB was founded as long ago as 1877 by William Morris, top left there, and his sidekick, Philip Webb, who was an architect. And together they were working in their professional lives to produce great designs, fabrics and tapestries, published works, buildings like Red House there at Bexley Heath, bottom right, that Webb designed for William Morris as his first home. But what really united them beyond this professional work was their combined love of old buildings. But I think it's important to say too that this wasn't just a sort of a male preserve in the early years. There were women firmly involved in the setting up of the organisation as well. So among them was Agnes Garrett, shown there in the image, who was a leading interior designer of her time. And she was central too to this campaigning and thinking that the SPAB was set up to champion. More than 140 years on, the SPAB today does many things. We're fundamentally a charity, but we're a source of advice. We're a training body. We do casework and campaigning within the statutory listed building consent system. We're an owner of various buildings. We're a society, so we're a social organisation too. And there are many, many more strands to our various activities. And we're funded by memberships and subscriptions, donations, as well as legacies and bequests, and public sector and charitable trust grants as well. So we run lots of courses. This one on the left was at Hampton Court for professionals involved in gauged brickwork, but we do courses for homeowners and others as well, and just things for enthusiasts too, photography and drawing and things of that kind. We also run every weekday morning a free technical advice line. Johnny worked on this for many years, and it's a public service, so anyone, owner or professional or enthusiast, can ring up and ask any kind of question about the management or care of their old building. And we'll give the best answer we can via the telephone, and suggestions of follow-up advice as well. One thing is central to the SPAB, and that's that we're a practical organisation. We like doing things with our hands, and that's what really appeals to SPAB members. So later this week, we'll be running our major annual working party. It's a fun experience, rather like a festival of conservation, if you like. And we have participants of all ages from all parts of the country. And Johnny's going to come back and tell you a bit more about this later on in the talk. For many years, our flagship training schemes, though, have been our scholarship, which was set up in the 1930s, and our fellowship, which was begun in the 1980s. The scholarship is for architects and surveyors and engineers, and our fellows are craftspeople. We send these trainees round the country for the best part of a year, visiting conservation sites and learning as they go along. On the right, this is one of our past fellows, a man called Andrew Zaminsky, and he now works on some really important historic buildings in the west of England. He's also become a best-selling writer. So this was his recent book called A Stonemason, for that is what he is. And it achieved some wonderful reviews and has sold remarkably well. Well worth a read if you haven't come across it. But the really interesting thing about Andrew, if you didn't know this already, is that if you read the introduction to his book, you'll see that he grew up in Reigate, and actually his formative years put him on that path that led to him being a fantastic conservation mason, and also a really great thinker and writer about historic structures and sites. So the SPAB remains true to its founding manifesto of 1877, and that's because we believe it's as relevant today as it was way back then. And at its heart are really ideas of responsible care, sustainability, some very modern concepts, but set out in this document all those years ago. Now, although the manifesto is our core text still, actually we recognized just a few years back that its language was a little bit off-putting to some, and it needed a bit of interpretation and translation for a modern audience. So this was the catalyst for the production of this document, the SPAB Approach of 2017. It's just a high-level guidance document for anyone living in or managing or working with historic structures of all kinds. It's available free on our website, and if this affects you, just have a glance through it. It's a very concise document, but the idea is it helps people in their thinking and planning about the way to deal with old buildings of any kind. So let's just look quickly at a few of our fundamental beliefs as set out in the SPAB approach. First of these is that historic fabric of buildings, the stuff that they're made from, is precious and really deserves to be looked after and cared for. And linked to that is the idea that restoration, the idea of turning back the clock, trying to put something back to a past form, is actually a really bad thing. It's the thing we try not to do at all costs. So here we've got a lovely historic monument, and you're actually seeing it there after repair. they tried to put it back to its past form through restoration, we think something of its character and interest and ancient qualities would have been seriously lost in that process. So for the SPAB, we think the best way to look after old buildings is through thoughtful, regular maintenance. Maintenance is fundamental to the way we approach old buildings. We also believe that it's vitally important to understand a building before any action is taken that affects it. And this understanding can be of various kinds, but certainly historical, understanding its evolution and its story and the changes over time, but also structural. You really need to appreciate how an old building is put together before you can make sensible decisions about its future alteration. So here's an illustration. On the left, traditional solid wall construction, and on the right, conventional modern construction with a cavity wall. Now, both are perfectly fine and sound as building methods. Where we say problems come is if the technology from the right is mixed with that from the left, and that can set up old buildings on a really harmful course sometimes when that mixing occurs. Sometimes significant work is, of course, needed. Where that's the case, we advocate something that we describe as conservative repair. And that's just about doing what's necessary, but no more or no less than that. It's about just keeping it to the minimum that you really need to do. And through that too, we would also argue for honesty, for making the new work honestly distinct from the old. So with a door repair like that on the left, just replacing those bits that need replacement and not trying to disguise the new work that's been done. Over time, this will weather in and look perfectly comfortable, but don't fake it up is the message we try to get across. So today, we're obviously one of many voluntary sector organisations operating in the heritage field. We try to work collaboratively wherever possible with a wide range of organisations, both at UK and at European level. So we have a branch in Ireland. We're not just a UK only organisation these days. And so we try to maintain those international links too, wherever we possibly can. Okay, well, that was a bit about us, but let's now move on to our main topic, which is this thing we call the Old House Project. And you'll get a bit of me here for introduction, and then Johnny will come in to talk in more detail about the work he's been doing there. So actually, what you're seeing on the screen is something rather special to us. You're the first audience that Johnny and I have talked to since we won last week this major National Museums and Heritage Award for the Old House Project. So Johnny and I are really delighted about this on a personal level. But as we'll explain, the project is very, very much a team effort. It's about a huge number of people from the SPAB and the local community who've been actively involved with it. So the credit is by no means our own. It's that team effort that's really mattered and has given it the success it's enjoyed so far. So here's the building it all involves. This is a place called St Andrew's Chapel. It's a derelict grade 2-star listed building, and it's actually on the at-risk register held by Historic England. It's at a place called Sandling, which is just outside Maidstone, so not a huge distance from where you are in Reigate. And I should say, you know, when things get a little bit easier as far as visiting goes, we try and involve as many groups as possible, and we would be absolutely delighted to see you over at the Old House project. It's not a long trip, certainly. So on the top left, excuse me, you're seeing the building just about as it currently is, after a certain amount of clearance work has happened. But bottom right, this is the building shown in a sketch of about 1860. And there are a few changes that have happened. If you can see my cursor there, that little pitch roof wasn't there in the sketch, and there are a few other little windows. But basically, over a 150-year period, this is a building that hasn't changed very much at all. And that's all part of its interest and appeal. So in the more distant past, the SPAB has owned and repaired quite a few historic structures. Some of them really quite unexpected, like Montacute House in Somerset, that many of you will know, I'm sure. Now owned by the National Trust, of course, but this was an SPAB building for some years, and we passed it on to the National Trust in order to be able to concentrate on other things. But over time, projects and property had not really been central to much of the SPAB's work. We tended to concentrate on training and on advice rather than on the management and repair of property itself. But this changed a little bit with a new strategy of 2016, because we really felt that we'd slightly distanced ourselves too far from the idea of site-based work and building repair. So at that point, we took the decision that we needed to find a project building in order to put our ideas into practice and to show people how we wanted buildings to be treated. So we looked at a really quite considerable number of potential structures and found almost across the board that these were either too expensive or that they didn't fulfill our needs in one way or another. We needed a building that reasonably large numbers of people could work on, that had a site where we could park vehicles and wouldn't disturb neighbours, that was easily accessible by public transport, you know, a wide range of criteria to make a project suitable for our needs. We came pretty close with the building shown bottom right, which was a lovely, lovely structure, 17th century dated gable, you might be able to work out in that image, and actually an even earlier timber framed building within that range on the right. But we made a serious offer for it after doing all our homework, and it was sold by sealed bids, and the winning bid was 8 times the amount that we had offered. So that made us realize that on the competitive open market, we really didn't stand much of a chance of gaining the kind of building we wanted. So in the end, we went via another route, and it was through the at-risk register with the considerable help of Historic England, in fact, that we were able to find St Andrews, negotiate with its previous owner, and reach a conclusion that suited that owner but was affordable for the SPAB, and a good solution all round. So then what do we want to do with this place? Well, having bought it, the idea is that this is a 5-year project. So not like a project any developer would carry out, where the objective would be just to sort it out as quickly as possible, turn it round and sell it on for maximum price. We want to spin out the repair process in order to maximize the value of things that we can get from it. So our key objectives are demonstrating the SPAB approach to conservation, that's fairly obvious, but also sustainability. We want to show that it's possible to repair sympathetically and sustainably too. At the same time, we want to deliver a wide range of educational and training activities, and it helps enormously, as Johnny will explain, that a neighbouring site is accessible to us for this. We want to pursue some research objectives along the way, look at things on site that will be of benefit to the others through the information gained. But ultimately, we do have to make this a habitable and saleable building so that we can pass it on and recoup at least the major part of the cost in the process. And one of the problems we have with saleability is, if you can see it top right hand there, the big drawback for St Andrews is it's right next to the M20 motorway, or M26, sorry. But, you know, it's so close that the motorway is a serious neighbour and needs to be factored into all decisions about the future of the site. So when we acquired the building, it had been empty for pretty much 50 years. And as such, it was really quite a time capsule, a wonderful thing, with virtually no changes since the Second World War or before. And so one of the things we have to do is protect and cherish this very precious interior. Little bit, first of all, about the sequence and dating of St Andrews. It's a multi-period building, and it really helps with its understanding to work out what's going on and the elements that make it so interesting over the centuries. So at its core, shown with a hard red line, is a single cell stone chapel. And this building has its original roof, and that roof has been dated through dendrochronology to 1484. So this is a late 15th century building. To the right, there's a small structure that is probably of contemporary date with the chapel. We think it's likely to have been a curate's lodging associated with the chapel. There are various clues pointing to that. The date on that is still a little bit uncertain. It's a complicated structure with lots of conflicting clues and bits of information. So moving on, for reasons I'll come to in a second, the building was involved in the dissolution of the monasteries, which we all know happened in the 1530s. And after that, it underwent a series of significant changes, some extensions to the west and to the south, and also at some point, perhaps a little bit later, the insertion into the chapel of this big central chimney stack as part of its conversion to domestic use. Now into the late 19th century, and two significant additions from this period. On the left, a little single cell room, and this was actually added on to make the building into the village post office. And we've got lots of bits of ephemera dating from its many decades of use as the village post office. And in fact, there are elder residents of Sandling who still recall going in to the building to buy their stamps and their postal orders. So it has that really strong connection to the local community. Also in the late 19th century, there was some reconfiguration. So the one existing staircase dates from that period too. But this isn't the whole story. So you might have spotted so far that the bit that I've missed out is this area top right. In fact, this is the southeast corner of the building. And this is actually the oldest part of the structure. So it predates the 1484 chapel. It's a timber-framed single bay, possibly part of something that was once larger. But although it failed its first attempt to dendrodate, a second attempt looking at the roof structure was more successful. And this has put it in the earlier part of the 15th century. So we've got a complicated sequence here where the chapel, which is the most substantial single element of the building, is not actually its first part. Let me now give you a bit of the wider context of the site. And I think through this, you'll really start to get a better picture of where the building sits in the landscape, its original functions, and how it relates to other historic structures nearby. So you're looking here at Kent's historic environment record. And as you'll know, I'm sure, this has lots of dots and stars and other indications of archaeological discoveries and historic structures and other features that make the landscape interesting. Landscape, of course, dominated today by the motorway cutting right through it, and then this major A road to the left, which is actually roughly on the alignment of a Roman road going from Rochester down to the south of Kent. But the circle in the middle shows our building, St Andrew's Chapel. But very importantly, just over to the right, you will see the site there marked of Boxley Abbey. And that is critical to the story of everything going on. So lots of the dots around are medieval archaeological finds, things relating to Boxley Abbey principally. You can see there's a grange farm here, an abbey farm here. The whole landscape here is linked to the abbey. But also some of the marks are Roman finds, some burials and other features. Because this is an even older landscape, it's become very readily apparent to us that we're looking at a monastic site that sits right on top of a location that's been managed and occupied for many centuries before that too. So then, Boxley Abbey. Well, this is a Cistercian abbey. And Cistercian abbeys, as you may well know, have a fairly standardized plan. They usually have an inner and an outer precinct. At Boxley, there are some features of the inner precinct that still survive very clearly. One of them is a rather lovely inner precinct gateway, which is shown with a red arrow on the plan and in the photograph there, with some lovely early brickwork remaining from an arch. And then in the orange circle, that's our building in an earlier map, St Andrew's Chapel. And I think it's pretty clear that the chapel is sitting on the boundary of the outer precinct of the abbey. So there is a very clear and strong relationship between the abbey and our site. And I think this is the explanation for its function, that the two are working with the same aim. And there's more evidence of that. So there are some significant fragments of Boxley Abbey that are still standing. And its overall plan at the core is shown here through archaeological investigation of the 1970s. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. We're finding out week by week a huge amount more about Boxley Abbey, and particularly about things that were going on within its inner and outer precincts. But the abbey itself, like many others, and I imagine like Reigate Priory, swapped over into being a domestic building after the dissolution. So in Boxley's case, it became a country house fairly soon after the dissolution itself. It's still a very substantial country house now, but in its immediate post-dissolution phase, it was rebuilt as a much, much bigger country house building. And so you're seeing even now fragments of its former self. A lot more knowledge exists about Boxley Abbey's daughter house, which was at Robertsbridge in East Sussex. And so from Robertsbridge, we know from the plan on the left that That building too had a gatehouse chapel, and it also had a substantial guest house. And this is really important to Boxley, because at Boxley, the most important surviving monastic structure is unquestionably its hospitium, which is shown in the image on the right. And this dates from the 1380s, which has been established again through dendrochronology. So, well, a hospitium, you may well know, but is a barn-like structure very often, but not a barn. Ours became a barn in the post-dissolution period, but actually a hospitium is a guest house. It's a place for accommodating pilgrims. And the sheer scale of the one at Boxley, it's colossal, shows just how many people were passing through that site. It was a major centre for pilgrimage in Kent in the medieval period, where people tended to come across to it and then move on to Canterbury. But Boxley was a destination in itself. And you can see that from the pilgrim's badge in the centre, which was discovered very recently in the Thames. And I'm hoping this may be loaned to us in due course. But think pilgrimage for anything about Boxley Abbey and St Andrews. This is fundamental to its reason for existence. And I think you get a real sense of that from this pilgrims lodging in Spain, where you've got row upon row of bunk beds within the hospitium space there. And that's exactly what was going on at Boxley Abbey in the medieval period. And all these people, as I say, would have passed through St Andrew's Chapel. It's the first point on the western perimeter of the Boxley site where anyone arriving would have reached the Abbey. And so really pivotal, rather like a sort of reception centre, if you like. So then we all know the dissolution took place in the 1530s. Henry VIII broke with the Pope and with the Catholic Church. And many major abbeys and chantries around the country were dissolved at that point. So Boxley, with its chapel, was surrendered in 1538. And then in 1540, all of the abbey's property was acquired from the king by one of his courtiers, Sir Thomas Wyatt, a great ambassador, court poet, alleged lover of Anne Boleyn. You know, many strings to Wyatt's bow, but he had very good reason for acquiring Boxley Abbey. So if you look on the map there, there's the Abbey top right, but there's Allington Castle, which was the Wyatt family home, little more than half a mile away from Boxley Abbey. So a very sensible acquisition for the Wyatt family. And Thomas Wyatt did a land swap with the king, which allowed him to acquire the site. After this, though, and despite a huge amount of digging, relatively little is known about St Andrews. It was certainly converted to a domestic building, probably in the 16th century, possibly a bit later. We don't know for sure. But it certainly fell into Boxley Abbey estate ownership during that subsequent period and remained so right into the 20th century. So it was only, in fact, in the late 1960s when the estate finally decided it wanted to sell off St Andrew's Chapel. It was all linked to the widening of the road that became the motorway. And it was sold to a family at auction. They sort of had aspirations to take it on as a retirement project and repair it, but it never quite happened. And it passed to the next generation, and they had the same plans too. And that never quite happened either. And that takes us to 2018, which is when the SPAB stepped in and discussed the purchase of the structure, which we were delighted to do. And I think the previous owner was pleased too, because she loved the building, but had never quite been able to get to the point where she could fix it in the way that was needed. Just to give you a sense of how it probably was for several of those centuries when it passed into a state domestic usage. This isn't St Andrews, but it is another estate cottage elsewhere nearby in Boxley, drawn here in a sketch of the 1840s. And you can see the standard thing throughout Kenton, Sussex and Surrey. Very simple interior, very little furniture, rudimentary floors and decorations. So that's the way to picture St Andrew's Chapel for a large chunk of its existence. As I've said, you know, we have gathered an awful lot of knowledge about the building already, and that's been possible through the help of local historians, local archaeological societies who've been fantastic in surveying and looking at the wider site with us. We've also been to the National Archive and Kent Local History Centre, where there are fantastic documents, but still much work to be done. We're only just scraping the surface of our knowledge of everything that was happening at Boxley. So I'll pause there and hand you over to my colleague Johnny, who's going to talk a little bit now about the things we've done on site and the activities of the project so far. Over to you, Johnny.
Thank you very much, Matthew. As Matthew says earlier in his talk about William Morris and the fact that we stave off decay by daily care, and really that does mean, as he stated in his quote, that we were propping perilous walls and mending leaky roofs, and effectively that's, if we go on to the next slide, you'll see that that was actually the case. So there's a local roofer, Ashford and Cranbrook Roofing, who came in right from the very start of almost the first day we took on the building, and helped just do some simple repairs to the roof that just stopped the water from getting in, particularly in this valley situation where it had been rotting a staircase. Thankfully the staircase dried out and it seems to be fine, so we're going to just carry out little repairs there. But really that did save, by fixing that roof, it really did save the staircase. We also, as Matthew mentioned, tried to understand the property as much as we possibly could. So before really touching anything, we carried out pretty much every survey you could imagine. And thankfully, through all the sort of contacts the SPAB have, we're very lucky in that we're able to have people that come along and with particular equipment that really can tell us everything that we're looking for. So if we go on to the next slide, you'll see here that one of the first things that we did was get an architect to actually, before we bought the property, to work out all of the sort of issues with it, and then we priced up the work with a local contractor, and also got a QS to price it up as well. So when we actually purchased the property, we were going in with our eyes wide open as much as we possibly can, and we're providing the fairest price, because the actual valuation of the property came in at about 660,000. We worked out through using Nicola and the QS and the contractor that it needed £600,000 worth of work. So we were able to offer a price of £60,000 for the site, which means that which was accepted, of course, thankfully, and took it off the Historic England's hands from the sort of risk register point of view, in that they knew that someone was going to be doing the work, particularly the SPAB, as well as we possibly can. And it just allowed us to spend the money, not giving it to such an owner as such, but actually spend the money on the property where it's really needed. We then commissioned another architect to get involved, Balfryer Architects, who also did their own condition survey and worked out all the areas of work that were required. If we go on to the next slide, please, Matthew. Other areas that we investigated was doing a full measured survey by hand, but also with the use of 3D scanning, which Terra Measurement helped us with. And this has been invaluable in allowing us to look at every aspect in detail, and provide very accurate drawings. If we go on to the next slide, please. So further investigations were undertaken by Catherine Hassel of the internal surface finishes, which were quite interesting in that certain areas of the building were decorated far more than other areas. It appears that where the public, from the post office point of view and the sort of little village shop point of view, were seeing the building, that was decorated more regularly, probably every 25 years or so, maybe even longer than that. But where there was areas where the family only really saw the property, so up at first floor level, the area there in some cases wasn't redecorated from the 1890s, I believe. Some of the paint surface finishes were from that period. So, you know, it was over 60, 70 years that painting hadn't actually been undertaken. Next slide, please. So one of the first things we had to do, because the roof that we'd got repaired temporarily really needed a lot more attention. And it's one of the striking features of the building, particularly when you look at the old photos, because there's a number of old photos with the family standing in front of the prettier side, the south side, from the First World War sort of period. And it's the roof in the background that is the same as it is today. And we didn't want to destroy that. If it wasn't broken, no need to fix it effectively. Okay, the roof might be 100, 120 years old and possibly coming to the end of its life, but with a sort of survey that was undertaken by our architects and ourselves at the SPAB, but also by the roofers, we felt that it had another 20 years of life in it. So what we decided to do was to repair the roof only where it needed. We tried initially to actually make the tiles from the clay that came from underneath the site. Unfortunately, that though the trials did work, the amount of tiles that we needed and the production line that we would need to produce them, that was going to be difficult. So in the end, we got William Blythe's, a maker of Kent peg tiles, up in the Hull area of the country, unfortunately not in Kent. But the reason we went with them over other people, possibly more locally, was the fact that they use 130-year-old kilns, and it was very much a handmade traditional tile, Kent peg tile. So that's the reason why we use them. It also appeared that a lot of the wheeled clay that was used for tiles was actually not wheeled clay, but was clay coming from the Midlands and from the Hull area, transported down to Kent to then be used as tiles. So we felt by using that clay anyway, but making the most out of the brick kilns and the tile kilns that we were doing the most traditional way. Next slide, please. So another aspect to the project that was quite tricky was that when we purchased the property, we realized that there was an easement across the site, and this transpired through various documentation that we found almost subsequently to purchasing, because it was all sort of hidden away, was that it was a gas pipeline. And having purchased the site, we got the gas a Scotch gas network involved, and they said that we shouldn't have, in any way, cross this line. It feeds most of Kent, so it is quite a large high pressure gas main. The issue was that the access from Bordy Lane, which is a small lane that runs up the side of the house, was too narrow really for our access to the site. So the architects insisted that we needed to apply for permissions to gain access from Grange Lane, which was a new road running alongside the M20. We've done that. It's taken about two and a half years to get the permissions from the gas board, the local authorities, archaeology, it goes on and on and on. But we're there. We put the concrete bridge in place to cross over the gas main. And in doing so, we had to do a lot of archaeology, and we didn't find a huge amount, I've got to say, other than this tile, which is up on the right-hand corner of the slide. And it's that tile which was found in the last 10 minutes of the excavation works that we were doing with the archaeologist on the day, that actually ties our site very neatly into the Boxley Abbey site, because a very similar tile, almost identical tile, was found in the Boxley Abbey church. And also another tile that is similar looking, but not exactly the same, was found where the remnants of a Cistercian tile kiln was found just to the north of our site. So that tile connected us to the sort of 3 important sites, and was one of the first bits of evidence to do that. Next slide, please. Another area which we knew right from the start was going to be an issue was the west wall. Now, as Matthew says, the building had been left for 50 years and it had been quite happy in that time. And for the first 6 months working with engineers on the building, we felt the same. But because the building was absolutely covered with trees, and in fact these weeds that had grown up in 50 years were now relatively large trees and bushes and shrubs. So to just gain access to the site, we had to remove some of those trees with permission. And that was, in the end, we felt to be quite a large change to the site, and it might upset the equilibrium of what the building's used to. So just for safety purposes, more than anything, that we put in a passive propping system, which, again, as Matthew was saying, we got the local people to help with, in this case 36 Engineers Regiment at Maidstone, and they used it as an exercise to prop buildings, so that when they went to the war zone, they were able to help the local people there with a similar sort of process. We also wanted to investigate the archaeology and actually the foundations of the building at the same time. So we undertook archaeology all the way around, and sort of trenches all the way around the building with permission again. What we found was on the main part of the chapel building, the foundations went down a good metre and a half in places. And in some areas it was difficult to get to the bottom of them. But where the west wall and where the chapel had been extended, we believe in the 1530 or 1540, let's say, when it became a house we believe from a chapel, and possibly this small extension to the sort of west end here was for a staircase or something along those lines. It's not, the jury's out on that at the moment, but it meant that because they went from great wealth when they were part of the abbey to now being having the abbey dissolved and all the wealth taken away by Henry VIII, to be then left with nothing to extend this building. They then put them back on very shallow foundations, and that's what we found for any of the walls that appear to be from the 1538, 1540 sort of period, and where it was converted into domestic accommodation. So you can see in the picture on the left, there's all sorts of services that have also cut through the wall at that point. And we believe that with the services, the fact of shallow foundations, and the fact that a yew tree was growing out the side of the building, that this all attributed to the issues to the west wall. Next slide, please. So you can see on the left-hand side here, we have a number of sections through a wall, and this is where the terra measurement drawings came into their own, in that we were able to slice through, and the engineers were able, who were Hockley Dawson engineers, they were able to work out exactly where it was outside its middle third, where the wall was unstable, which was actually only in one real area, where you can see on the top right picture, that's the propping that we put in place, the passive propping. So rather than propping the whole wall, we really only lightly touched. It's not holding the wall up in any way. It's literally just there to catch it if something catastrophic happened. But it's and then in the meantime, we've been monitoring the building for over coming up to to 2 years now, both by hand and also digitally with the help of Socotec, who are quite a large engineering firm, who again have come into the project and free of charge used it as a bit of a case study to look at the the structural aspects and understand how the building is moving. Now they've got the final monitoring by Socotec this July at the working party. But from all of the evidence that we've taken so far, it shows that the movement is seasonal and not actually getting worse in any particular area. So the movement is about 4 millimeters, but it tends to move throughout the year and then revert back to the same position every July, from what we can tell. So moving forward, next slide, please. Okay, so just before I go on to the chalk and lime, we hope that with the west wall, we're going to be investigating it in greater detail from July onwards. And if any of you are interested in being involved in the thinking of what we should be doing, then please watch this space and the SPAB's website, because we hope to by April next year have a good proposal in place that is sympathetic to the building, and hopefully will allow the wall to remain pretty much as it is for as long as possible, with obvious honest repair in place. So the next area which we found to be fascinating is when we analysed the mortars across not just the Boxley Abbey site, but also the Old House project site. And what transpired was it was a grey chalk. So you've all heard of white chalk, I'm sure, but grey chalk is a feebly hydraulic chalk, which, with a little bit of clay added in to give it that sort of greyness, it, when it's burnt in a kiln, will provide a feebly hydraulic set. So with the chalk that would have come from the North Downs in Cistercian times, that we weren't able to go up there and get that chalk. We then had to find another source, and the one we went for, which was very easy to get to, was the Oxted grey chalk and the Southern Gravels quarry, which I'm sure a number of you know. As you're passing by the M25, you see it on the inner side of the M25, on the London side of the M25, this huge sort of cliff rock face of chalk with about 7 lime kilns up there. A place I'd always wanted to go to, and thankfully they were very happy for us to be there and to take away, well, in fact, they offered us 2,000 tons of the stuff. We only needed 3, so we took the 3 tons, and we built ourselves a field kiln, which you can see on the left-hand side there. Now, the field kiln was built from lime stabilized soil, which is something that the Romans invented, but it's something, again, which the BLF and Stafford Holmes particularly, who a number of you might know, who's written a number of books on lime and burning of lime, is something that he swears by. So it's extremely easy to undertake, in that we dug up the marl, which was the top surface of clay from our site, mixed it with straw and with the any leftover quicklime or quicklime that we had left over from the site from the previous year, and mixed it together. It's only literally 10% quicklime that we used, and it sets firm. And using shuttering, we were able to build this field kiln. We were able then to put the grey chalk in there, and after doing a few test burns, we went from a ratio of 1 fuel to 2 stone being produced to now 1 fuel to about 7.5 times stone being produced. So it's gone through the testing that we've done. We've actually produced quite an efficient kiln made from the local clay. And we hope through the working party next week to burn all of the grey chalk. This will be the first time that we've done it in the last 2 years of working at Boxley Abbey, actually producing all of our own quicklime that we can then use the Boxley Abbey and OHP site for all its repairs. So we look forward to doing that. But in the meantime, and last year, we were able to do some trials on our building, and you can see an area that was repointed here. This is freshly pointed, so it's highlighted, possibly a little bit clean and tidy compared to the actual stone that joins it, but it is actually the same look and colour and texture as the original lime mortar that we found. The difference being is that we've actually added in a crushed Kentish ragstone aggregate to this mortar. Now that Kentish ragstone aggregate has two uses. One, it helps strengthen the mortar, provides some sharpness to the mortar, which the original mortar didn't have. And then the second reason is that it distinguishes where we've been on the building. So to all intents and purposes, it is exactly the same mix as what the Cistercian monks used for building Boxley Abbey and St Andrew's Chapel, but you can easily identify exactly where we've been if you're looking closely. So next slide, please. Next slide, please.
I think that's back to me now, Johnny.
Oh, okay.
So leave it to me. Just a word about what we're intending to do and the consents we need for that. So our ideas and proposals are still in development. We haven't yet submitted anything formally to Maidstone Council, but there have been some very helpful, useful pre-application discussions with both authorities. We have always intended that the building should be returned ultimately to domestic use. That's what it was for the majority of its life. And we took valuations, as Johnny said, from the outset, which made it look as if an end value after repair and minor extension might be about £650,000. So that's led all our financial thinking. We're very fortunate to have secured a loan facility from the Architectural Heritage Fund for £500,000, should we need it. We've also got a very generous grant from the Pilgrim Trust, which has helped towards many aspects of the work. So we're confident the funding is in place, and actually in practice, again, as Johnny said, we've done so well from voluntary help and input that we're actually proving able to reduce the real cost of the work. But what we want to be able to do as well is to demonstrate to an ordinary purchaser what it might have cost to do these repairs had it been done purely on an open market value. One of the slight oddities of the whole thing is you can see the building there as a very solid roof structure, and it's never ceased to be that. But because it's spent half a century disused and unoccupied, the planners have taken the view that it has actually ceased to be a domestic building. It simply doesn't exist in planning terms. It's an area of sort of open field or garden. So we're actually being required to apply for planning permission to create a dwelling as if it was brand new from scratch, which is fine. And we've had some good assurances from the council that they're entirely sympathetic to what we want to do. But rather annoying too, because you may well have heard of the Community Infrastructure Levy, which is there for very good reasons in terms of new housing. But the fact that we'll probably end up having to spend 30 or 40,000 just to re-establish its domestic use against the cost of the charity is mildly irritating, I would say. You can see there the existing structure and quite a lot added onto it to the right. This isn't quite as much as it seems, and what's going on there is for very deliberate reason. On the right, there's a garage. The building is really very compact inside with almost no storage area. So we know any user is going to want some storage. We've kept this away from the main part of the building. But also that garaging accommodates an air source heat pump. So these things are quite noisy. This will be kept away from the building. And it means that we're minimizing the servicing impact on the historic structure. Between that garage and the old part of St Andrews, we're intending to build this rather substantial ragstone wall, which may look a bit excessive for the site, but the whole of the Abbey area is characterized by very high masonry walls. So there's a good tradition. It's also relevant that there's lots of ragstone about, and we're very close to the ragstone quarry in Kent, so we can obtain this material very locally. But equally important is that you'll remember the close proximity to the motorway. This is an acoustic screen. We're trying to produce a defensible acoustic space behind the wall where people using the house will have a bit of a barrier and a bit of noise separation from the traffic that rumbles past for most of the day. So back to Johnny now, who's just going to talk about our working parties and how the one we're about to have very shortly will apply to the Old House project and Boxley Abbey. And after that, technology willing, we'll just show you a very short video of work last year, which sort of sums up and will bring to life, I think, what we've been doing on site and where the whole thing's heading. After that, if anyone has any questions, we would be absolutely delighted to answer them. But Johnny, over to you first for a bit of working party explanation.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm sure you've heard about the SPAB working parties over the year, if not years, if not actually been involved in them. They've been running for about 40 years now, and I've been very lucky in helping out at the last 15 or so, and it's been an absolute joy. As you can see here, it's trying to pass on knowledge from someone who has great experience to younger generation that are coming up and are keen to learn. It's very much a hands-on experience. In this particular year, on the left-hand side, you can see Lawrence and the volunteer here both don't have masks on, so that must have been 2019 at Boxley Abbey. Whereas actually on the right-hand side, you can see this was what we did last year in the midst of COVID. Just as we came out of lockdown, we had a working party, and everybody abided by the rules and stayed 2 meters apart from everybody. And it was all a very successful working party, even though we had COVID against us. Next slide, please.
I think that may be the point, Johnny. Just to say, we have a website, of course, which explains more about the project. So if you're interested to follow it or gain further information, do go to our website, and you'll see plenty now and over coming years about what we're trying to do there. Let's, if Robert would kindly oblige, I'll come out of the PowerPoint sharing, and then I think Robert's going to be able to bring up the video, and Johnny will just talk you through what's going on. It's very short and rapid, but very evocative as well.
Yeah,